Welcome to Backstage with the Baronsmen, a deep dive into the inner workings of a historical theater company in Austin, Texas. The holidays are upon us, filled with friends, family, and heaped with tradition. Because we're the nerds we are here at TBM, we wondered how the Elizabethans and medieval folks celebrated the Christmas and Yuletide holidays. To help us nerd out about it, our longtime sharers Katrina O'Keefe and Miss Samantha Smith. Hello, ladies.
Hi, long time no see.
Thank you so much for joining us.
This is thank you for inviting us. This is one of my folklore is one of my favorite topics, and the history around this period is a big favorite of mine.
I'm mostly here for the food.
There's food.
There's food.
All
Christmas
right.
food is best.
So I guess we were just gonna jump right on into this and everything.
Sure.
Jackie, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. All right. So as we get into it, we're going to talk about kind of basic stuff and then just see where we go, because you all know so many different things about medieval history, all that good stuff. So what were the holidays, particularly, I guess, Christmas, like in Elizabethan or medieval times? Like what did they do to celebrate? What was the sort of start of that y'all know of?
Well, the best part about it, I think, is probably the length of the Christmas season. I would definitely say, because right now we think of it like Christmas. We'll do Christmas Eve, and then we do Christmas, and then there's the dead week between Christmas and New Year's where nobody gets anything actually accomplished, and then there's New Year's and everything is over. And thankfully, I'm starting to celebrate in a more medieval way myself. So Christmas is the start of the Christmas season, and it will go until Epiphany, which is the whole 12 days of Christmas, which means I have all that time to get my Christmas cards out if I really feel the need. But it gives, in the big difference, I think, is that we kind of got shorted a little bit on Christmas season. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense when you've got Santa stuff going up in the stores in June, but we're not celebrating and doing the cool things the same for 12 intense days.
Which is crazy. Why would we not? You know?
Because they want us to go back to work eventually.
That's true.
So
After the first of the year.
So in the Middle Ages, in medieval and Tudor and early Renaissance England, you didn't get, just broadly throughout the year, you got one day off a week for Sunday, and people think that, oh my gosh, people just worked like, every hour of the day, and that's not really true. Depending on the season, for one thing, you might not have as much work to do, but a bigger thing was other holy days apart from Christmas. Like Christmas was a big one. You had this big 12-day span of time that was all about celebrating. But your average, say, medieval peasant in England worked maybe 240 days a year. And so you've got the 52 Sundays in there, you've got the 12 days of Christmas, but there's a bunch of holy days and feast days and this huge, enormous liturgical calendar that tells you what you're doing. And gives you an idea of how time is passing. During the 12 days of Christmas in particular, during Advent leading up to that, it is a particularly austere time. You're not eating any meat, you're not eating any dairy, you are fasting up until then. And on Christmas Eve, the only holiday thing you get to do is to start decorating. So you get to bring in the holly and the ivy, which you got the Christmas Carol, the holly and the ivy. You bring in bay, you bring in rosemary, and you just garland up your whole home, bringing in that greenery and that image of life into your home to start the celebration.
Most people know that, of course, that the Christmas tree isn't a thing that they had in Elizabethan England, but candles, greenery, oh yes, bells, absolutely.
Well, I have a question. I'm a big PBS nerd, and particularly Lucy Worsley, I think is
Worsley.
her last
Yes.
name. Yeah. And I don't know if y'all caught her special, The 12 Days of
did.
Christmas. It was amazing. And it
Mhm.
really prompted me to like, I mean, I knew kind of like Lord of Misrule, Yule log, all that. So, I mean, Yule log's more Norse, but was celebrated by the Elizabethans. But, you had like, it was just such a cool span because and this is going to be like weird, but I always thought, the 12 Days of Christmas, that song, but then to see her special, it really then, oh, it's not even about that. It's really, that time span in between and the plow, what it ends with the plow day, correct? I think.
It ends on Epiphany.
Epiphany,
Three
thank you.
Kings.
Gotcha.
Three Kings.
So yeah, I mean, like, and what would be some other stuff as well? Like, obviously the dressing up with the holly. What do y'all know about the Lord of Misrule? Like, kind of that whole sort of
Ooh.
thing.
So
So there's some controversy about where the Feast of Misrule comes from, because you've got Fraser and the Golden Bough, who's like, this definitely comes from Saturnalia.
that's my
This
money.
comes from like, you sacrifice. So you have the cake and like gets parceled out, and
Yeah.
whoever gets the bean is king of the bean, and then gets sacrificed, like just straight up blood sacrifice at the end of that.
No.
Probably
No,
not.
no, Lee, no. Okay.
Okay,
So-
we're going there.
The idea is, back in the day, Saturnalia was a Roman holiday.
Yeah.
And the Roman holiday, one of the high points of the thing was when a slave was put in charge of the household.
Gotcha.
And
Stuff like peasants. Yeah.
pranks were played, shenanigans ensued, whole lot of pregnancies dated from that time of the year. And then at the end of it, because you had this guy who technically shouldn't have been in charge of making any of these decisions, early Romans would take him out back and have him removed from the equation. Later in time, it became more of a it's more of a party thing, and it became a lot more like how we do when you do Mardi Gras and you try to get the baby out of the cake, and if you
Yeah.
get the baby, then you're Rex for the party.
Yep.
Same idea. If you find the bean or the shilling or the halfpence or whatever is in the cake, eat the cake carefully. It's often a pudding. It needs to be chewed very thoroughly. But if you find your whatever, then you get to be in charge of maybe just the next party, but probably a couple of days worth of parties. So you wanted to be sure whose table you were eating at, because if you were, invited to the palace and you're having a nice big spread and then you get the bean, you're hosting a lot more than just your nearest and dearest at that next big party.
Yeah.
So it's a way to make people go broke.
Yeah, I mean, because you just reminded me too, and we'll keep talking about it, but also I want you guys to touch on like the food that was that they brought, especially in that time. I mean, we know it's very different. But yeah, I mean, but some of it's still the same. Like my family does a few things that date back to probably Elizabethan times, that sort of celebration thing, I think. I don't know. We'll talk about that later, but at an end question for all of us. Yay. But yeah, what Sam, you were gonna say something. What were you gonna talk about? Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
So associated with the Feast of Misrule is also a tradition that came in and out of fashion in England, and finally went straight out of fashion. Elizabeth got rid of it entirely. The boy bishops. So this is something that's still done in Spain, and is done in a couple of other places, like stayed on the continent, but it's the same idea. So the bishop of that.
I'm like, what's a boy bishop?
We're getting there.
We're getting there. So they would pick a kid, like a boy from the bishopric. The bishop would step down, pop his mitre on the kid's head, pop his robes on the kid. It's like, you're bishop for the next couple of weeks. I could go from Halloween to Candlemas.
Yeah.
Having this kid in charge, and the kid would run mass. The kid was,
go in procession.
What's Candlemas? Explain Candlemas for people that don't know what that is.
Candlemas is the 2nd of February, and it is the Feast of the Virgin Mary and the Feast of St. Bridget. the
So that makes
Firebringer.
sense that that would be an
Oh, I love
extension to
her.
go to. Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I did not know that. I'm one of the masses that did not know. So
Now you know.
You know,
And see,
I've done a few things around Candlemas, hosted some
I was
parties,
gonna say
that
you
kind of
both
thing.
have,
So,
man. It's like something like
it's
that.
I've
What
grown to
about
love
food?
Candlemas. Yeah.
What
well,
about food?
my favorite Christmas food is actually one that did become very popular in Elizabethan England, and it's one you already know, and that's spice cake.
Yes.
Oh, yum.
Gingerbreads and spice cake are both in Elizabethan cookbooks. I mean, we've got cookbooks with these different mixtures in them, and the flavor profile is virtually identical. Some of them are a little more on the nutmeg, some of them are a little more on the cinnamon, which is kind of how they are now. You make it to your personal tastes and flavors.
Yeah.
But nowadays, when we think of gingerbread, a lot of times we think about those kind of slightly dried out little gingerbread cookies.
Oh yeah.
You can, like,
No.
you gotta whack it a little bit
Yep.
to get into it. And when they thought about gingerbread, it's more like a sheet cake.
Yeah.
It's massive.
And laced with honey and all of the most expensive spices that you can get.
Raisins and oranges and sugar, just straight sugar, because sugar was available but not cheap.
Right.
It was a
So,
big status symbol.
Yeah.
not quite as expensive as maybe cooking with saffron is. You know how if you make saffron rice, you're going to put like 3 little bits of
Yeah.
saffron in there for a big pot because good gosh, that stuff.
Mhm.
It's not quite that expensive, but it was expensive enough that it was a status symbol. And
As were the bad teeth that you got from eating it.
they were for a bit. Elizabeth was noted for her very bad teeth towards the end of her life because she loved sugared possets.
Oh
my
yeah.
gosh.
what are sugared possets?
A posset is any kind of a warmed drink. So that mulled wine that you were going to have, if you put sugar in it, that's a sugared posset.
Gotcha.
Oh,
A lot of times they'd make them up with like, it's like almost like a warm milk tea. It's honey and milk and a little extra sugar and some spices to make it kind of zing. And you mix it all up and you make sure it's warm and you
Okay.
drink it at bedtime. It's very soothing. I would just jitter through the roof. That's a lot of
I was gonna say that much sugar at bedtime.
I'm like,
for me.
"God." No, it's horrible.
But yeah,
What about
a lot of that Christmas feast was about prestige, especially the
Yeah.
richer you were. If you were of any means at all, you were not just making food for yourself and your family, and even like not just yourself, your family, and your friends to eat. You were making it for anyone who came to your door.
Yeah.
You were specifically making so much more than you could eat. And one of the things that was really, believe it or not, Elizabethan traditional is something that is also American traditional food for Christmas: turkey.
Yeah.
Turkey came over in 1534. Henry VIII ate it. They made Christmas pies that you've heard of the turducken. That's the turkey stuffed with the duck, stuffed with the chicken. They had a turkey stuffed with a goose, stuffed with a chicken, stuffed with a partridge, stuffed with a pigeon. In a pie,
Yeah.
that's about like this deep, like maybe 5 or 6 inches high at least. And you could make a small one that's only about a foot across.
So I have a question. Has anyone had goose or pigeon or partridge? Has anyone had that?
I've had
Yeah.
goose.
Yeah, I've had all
I've
of
had
them.
goose and
Okay.
partridge. I've never had pigeon.
I had pigeon in Morocco, but that was a totally different thing. But yeah, it's interesting.
know?
Like game is it's such a different, heavier, like a very flavorful meat. I think anything that's
It's
like that.
probably not as different tasting as you might think, because
No,
a lot
yeah.
of the spices that were, really high, people who eat food that's spiced like English medieval and Renaissance food, the high status stuff, they say this has a really Mediterranean or Middle
I
Eastern
could see
flavor
that.
profile.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
Well, that's why they
some
got a
my
lot of their
favorite-
spices.
yeah.
Some of my favorite recipes are that I've had recently are just modified Roman
Mhm.
And they're modified because I don't like veal as much as I like chicken, and chicken's cheaper and easier for me to get.
Yeah.
So I'll just swap the one for the other, and I can pretty much pick up all the rest of the ingredients just right off the grocery store shelf. And a lot of the things that we think of nowadays as kind of traditionally Christmassy, like hot cider,
Mhm.
that's wassail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're drinking our apple harvest. It's
Mhm.
right towards the end of the year, and we've had it put up enough because the apples are harvested a little earlier,
Mhm.
but it's been in cask long enough to make a nice young cider that's
Yep.
very fun and tasty.
Alcoholic.
Alcoholic, warming,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and wassailing is, of course, a lot of people who've kind of done a little Christmas caroling have heard that wassailing is where Christmas caroling came from, but that's as much explanation as people usually get.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of fabulous British traditions of going door to door and asking people for stuff.
Yep. Like the mummers who like will wear these
Yes.
wild masks and are not allowed to
Yes.
talk.
They just the whole
Mhm.
time. That's why they're called mummers. They're mum.
Yep. Mum, mum, mum.
Okay. I think
I'm
I
learning so
remember-
much.
Well,
I'm learning so much. I didn't know this.
The mummers are actually part of the very old tradition of ghost stories.
yes.
Ghost stories. Because we mostly tell our ghost stories around Halloween, and they did. They had All Hallows Eve and All Saints Day, but I mean, what is a better time of year for a good ghost story than when you're all stacked around a fire,
Yeah.
drinking something warm and lovely and alcoholic, and this creepy guy with a weird no face look who can't talk comes in and is like, okay, ghost stories times.
Creepy.
But it is
Got it.
also, the end of the year, the start of the new year. There's
Yeah.
a lot of death and rebirth traditions around the solstice as well as All Hallows Eve.
This
Like-
particular solstice is going to be crazy because it is like what
Dude.
the alignment or something is like once in the last time was 1640 or something. I don't know,
It's Jupiter
1600s
and
when
Saturn.
yeah. So whoo, crazy.
Around the time of the Great Plague. Yeah.
If I
That
remember
feels
correctly-
familiar.
The
Yeah.
Great Fire.
excuse me, did Henry VIII write a Christmas song? Why is that sticking out in my head? Okay, what did he write?
He wrote this very romantic song about holly and ivy. And it is kind of, while it's in that that Lucy Worsley
That's
Tudor
right.
Christmas documentary, which I love. It's so much fun. And the way she describes it as is, the king wrote a pop song.
Yeah.
And he
Which is
did.
true.
And
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
talking about how my love for you will be as evergreen as the holly and the ivy.
Mhm.
But he also wrote the tune
Mhm.
to what we hear as God Rest You Merry Gentlemen.
Gentlemen. Gotcha.
Um,
That's interesting.
it was a love song. It was definitely not a Christmas song when he wrote it. And there's there's some interesting other traditions that some of the older Christmassy songs may or may not have been connected to him, but that one they've got music for.
Isn't there, I know it's highly debated that he wrote Green Sleeves, which is also the tune to the
What
classic
child is
church
this?
hymn, What Child Is
Yeah.
This? So,
Yeah, it's one of those that the evidence is strongly both ways. So part of the problem, of course, is that you're still talking about a time when they're efficiently trying to figure out how to write music and
Yeah.
put it on the page in a way that we would currently recognize. They've been doing it in France. It was a thing that had been happening, but England is not the center of the universe. And
Oh
it's not even
no.
a very
Yeah.
important little island in the middle of nowhere at
No.
this particular
shut
point.
the front door.
Oh, I know.
One of the wildest things that I learned when I was studying, of all things, medieval women's literature is that for most of history, like right up until, say, Spanish Armada getting knocked out by the English, England was a backwater culturally, and socially.
It was like
If
telling
you were going to be a woman anywhere in Europe, in say, the the Middle Ages, you did not want to be in England. Be a German nun. If you want to be a woman in the Middle Ages in Europe, be a German nun. You had a lot more agency than you might imagine.
That sounds like another podcast. Don't.
Italian artists. There's female doctors in Salerno.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever you do, don't go to England.
Don't go to England. Life is going to suck for you.
Wow.
You are more of a second-class citizen than
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely another podcast. Because I'm taking a Shakespeare class right now, and we have to we're studying the different themes, and of course, I'm like, I could have gone easy and gone supernatural in Shakespeare, which is like I could do it in my sleep.
Double handfuls.
Right.
Yeah. But I chose the roles of women and how the plays the plays that Shakespeare wrote reflect traditional Elizabethan society. And so
Which
yeah.
you can't do without looking at Taming of the Shrew. Naturally, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but
Oh yeah. So
one of the wildest, and I promise I will not go long on this tangent, but one of the wildest things to me was that Taming of the Shrew was considered extreme for its time. Like, people were like, Petruchio is a monster. Look at him abusing his wife so terribly. Like, you know, we look at it today and think, oh my gosh, this is just ridiculous. People were shocked then.
Yeah.
interesting.
They even people wrote fan fiction, frankly, fan fiction plays that fixed the ending.
Lots
fair.
of those.
That's fair.
So I have a question. Was there mistletoe? Speaking of kissing and men and women, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
So mistletoe was then as well.
Mistletoe
Yes.
is one of the evergreens that
Yeah.
would be brought into the house, and the little white berries clash so lovely with the little red berries on the holly.
Mhm.
The tradition of kissing under the mistletoe, I don't know. I've not
Right.
seen anything for that, but I haven't seen
Yeah.
anything against it either.
Okay.
I
That's
think
always
it was
curious.
not specifically mistletoe, but weird things about kissing, about medieval and Renaissance kissing, a lot more common than you might think. There's a woman in some play, I can't remember, who complains about this guy who she hates, who keeps coming to her house. And in England at that time, it was appropriate to on the mouth kiss your guests when they came over.
The kiss of peace.
Yep.
Yeah,
You know, if it's
no.
somebody
Like,
you don't
it's
particularly
not,
care
it's not a
for.
handshake, it's not a hug. It's a
No, thank you. No, thank you. Do not recommend.
so yeah, like imagine your significant other's most obnoxious friend. And imagine having to kiss that guy every time he comes over.
So I have a question. What is it with the English wanting to decorate their homes with poison berries?
Well, everything else had already been eaten.
That's fair.
This is a flip answer, but it's not entirely untrue. The English at the time, especially, were really good about maintaining hedgerows and going through their woodlots, and basically anything that they could put aside to eat, they knew that they had to. But Christmas was a feast. And the feast, you needed to have food for people and food for animals, because that's pretty much the only work you're going to be doing, is making sure the animals are maintained for 12 days. But everything else is, you know, you kind of look around and you're like, okay, well, no, we're going to eat that. We're going to eat that. We're not going to eat those. Put those on the thing.
Right. We'll
Those in
nail
the
that to the
first.
wall because we can't eat it.
Well, that was honestly just like a joke question, but you know, you had a real answer to that.
So I have a question. So we've talked about a lot of really cool things that they did back then. What do we still kind of, I mean, and honestly, listening to you, a lot of that we still have. It's just morphed into our own sort of thing. But what do you think is probably the ones that are still probably the most traditional that we celebrate today?
So definitely the greenery, the feasting,
Yeah.
gift giving was a thing then and is a thing now.
Including the suck up gifts.
Oh yeah. Oh, there was that boar spear. There was
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
if you wanted to suck up to Henry VIII, buy him dogs
Dogs.
and like anything for hunting, but especially hunting hounds.
Elizabeth really loved scented Spanish leather gloves and silk
Yes.
stockings. And one of the interesting points about in the history of knitting, which we're not talking about, but in the history of knitting,
Podcast.
some
But
of
we
the
could.
first machine knit stockings ever were given to Elizabeth as a Christmas present by the Welshman who had invented this knitting machine. And she loved them. And then she turned down his patent because she didn't want to put the cottage industries out of work.
Yeah.
Makes
So-
sense.
That was kind of her, sort of.
Sort of. Right.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, sometime prior to that, it was made law. I don't think Elizabeth did this. It was Henry, I think, with the Monmouth cats. To boost the wool trade, it was required for you to wear a wool cap on Sundays.
Yep.
Like everybody had to wear
Every
it.
male over the age of like 5 had
Yeah.
to wear a woolen cap on Sunday and practice archery.
Yes, that's one of the points too. That so one of the things that we tend to do when we get together is play games of all kinds, and it was especially sports in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that was if you were trying to play medieval baseball, which I can't remember what I have it written down here somewhere what medieval baseball was. It was but you could not just play a pickup game whenever you wanted. What was it?
Stool ball.
Stool ball.
When you're sitting on the
You
stool
could not
and they're
do a pickup game whenever you wanted. It was only during the Christmas season, because the rest of the time, if you're playing stool ball, you're not practicing archery. And it is a lot more important for you to be able to shoot a Frenchman, sorry, French people, than to be able to make a goal.
No French people were harmed in the making of this podcast.
Hey, so what about, so we hear about Henry, we hear about Elizabeth. What about Mary?
Oh, yes. So,
Sorry.
So here's the
this-
fun part.
yeah.
Catholics liked Christmas. They
Oh,
liked
yes.
Christmas a lot.
Yes.
Mary liked to dance. She liked to gamble.
Mhm.
She really enjoyed big parties. When she was on the throne, she would throw a rager.
Yep.
It was awesome.
That's so
Now,
cool.
When Mary passed, and we had
The very Protestant Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, who is walking that fine line between
Yeah.
people who still want to be Catholic, but we have decided we're going to call it something else, and
Right.
people who 100% want to break all the stained glass, burn all the statues, whitewash all the walls. We don't do these things. So she's walking between two excessive lines. And so she's like, we're going to do Christmas, but it's just going to be a small Christmas this year. Just
Right.
like my mother every year. It's just going to be a small Christmas this year. And then of course Christmas happens and it's nuts. But we're going
Well,
to
the Middle Ages really was a time of extremes in general.
It's true.
And so Mary, of course, being a Catholic monarch, was absolutely all about celebrating every feast day to the hilt. Elizabeth less so, but like you're saying, yeah, she really had to walk this very fine line,
Yeah.
especially because she was the monarch right after Mary. And she's trying, she is slowly and as painlessly as possible, which still, has a lot of people getting their heads cut off for treason, pulling England into the Church of England.
Right.
But the Protestants, the Pilgrims who came over to the to what would eventually become the US, did not celebrate Christmas. They were profoundly anti-celebration. If you were going to celebrate the feast, the birth of our Lord,
Yeah.
you did it, midnight mass. You could go to midnight mass, or not midnight mass, but you go to midnight
Yeah.
service.
Go to the meeting house.
You go to the meeting house, and then you would spend the day in contemplation while working.
Yeah.
You could spend the day at home if you
Puritan.
really had nothing to do, but everyone's going to look at you funny. Governor Bradford, who was the governor of the Plymouth Plantation, actually like disciplined some people on the second Christmas that they had there. Because the first Christmas, everybody was racing to build enough like houses and buildings that they wouldn't freeze to death, which
Right.
good half of them did. But the second Christmas, they had guys playing stool ball outside who got like Governor Bradford broke up their game and was like, I cannot in good conscience see you playing games while other people are working. Christmas celebrations were outlawed in various parts and various times of the United States. It really only picked back up in the 19th century. It was after we separated off into our own country that it started very slowly coming back.
A lot of the coming back, would be traditions. Like if you go to a Georgia Christmas, it's very large and very lavish and very big. If you go to a Maryland Christmas, lots of traditions. If you go to a Massachusetts Christmas, not as much.
Yeah.
Georgia and Maryland were both originally settled by Catholics.
Whereas in Boston, Christmas was outlawed for years and years.
Puritans have managed to prevent Christmas in Massachusetts. Santa Claus definitely had them on the naughty list.
That's crazy. I mean, it's also funny because I'm Catholic. I don't practice, but like growing up, like I think even today there's, what is it, St. Nicholas or something that I remember we would have. My parents would stash, a bag that was like fruit and candy, and we would find it, and I was thinking of that when we were getting ready to start this. I was like, is today that day? I mean, we don't do it anymore, but
it's the 6th.
It's the 6th. Okay.
And the reason I know
Catholics
that
and
is because
Germans.
we still celebrated it when I was growing up in Germany.
Yep.
You would have to put your shoes outside the door with carrots in them for St. Nicholas's horses.
Thank
And
you.
when you put your shoes back in, there would be like little toys and some candy.
Or coal sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I think sometimes you were not.
We'd get coal and switches.
Yep.
Right. We definitely did that when I was a kid. My mother's side of the family
He
is
is
German.
completely horrified.
No.
Yeah.
That's not how you celebrate Christmas.
Well, it wasn't.
No, that is inaccurate. It is how some people celebrate
Yeah.
Christmas.
I mean, we're my family's German, and so that was a big thing that we did. Is I remember growing up with that, and it was like we'd search the house. Did St. Nicholas come? So that's so funny. I mean, and it's crazy too. Like I'm gonna slightly go back, and then I know we'll keep going on. But I mean, it's so funny that we talk about Mary because, and this is probably another podcast entirely, but.
Ooh.
Really, I mean, you look at it like it's always, I think of Marsha, Elizabeth, and we don't hear much about Mary. And I mean, it's wild because in my mind, the portrayal that we have in a lot of places now is that Bloody Mary, she was, all this crazy stuff.
Because one of the things that Elizabeth's government did really well was propaganda.
Oh, yes.
And they took a huge risk because people who were still alive who remembered Mary and could be like, I don't remember her eating babies. Not,
I saw her several times and she wasn't eating babies.
They started rehabilitating her reputation literally the second Elizabeth's butt hit the throne.
Yep.
And that is the same time period where they developed what historians refer to as the Black legend about Spain. And that's where when we say, what do you know about medieval Spain? And everybody goes, well, conquistadors.
Right.
We know horrible things. Okay, yeah.
Black dresses, women don't have feet.
Happen. What good things do you know of that happened? The Elizabethan era propagandists did a bang up job. They really and truly destroyed any kind of normal relationship between England and Spain in the archives. I mean, they went out of their way to make sure that Elizabeth was what you saw.
This is so going to be a 2021 podcast, y'all. I'm already saying right now, we're coming back for a discussion about Mary. Y'all want to come back? I think it's fascinating. So
I'm in.
But if anybody mentions the TV show that begins with the R word, I'm gonna start throwing things at the laptop.
No violence, no violence.
Our word.
Can't hurt them from here.
Put it in the chat.
We'll tell you about it later.
Okay.
We can all scream later. It'll be
Well,
fine.
So question, y'all, what is your favorite holiday tradition? Or I mean, for each one of us, because I know we're kind of winding down, but like, what's something in it? And it could be something that you think that is Elizabethan that you do yourself, or even something modern too. I mean, everybody has different traditions, and I think it's amazing to see like what people do to celebrate the holidays, Christmas, New Year's. So yeah.
So we've talked about St. Nicholas Day, and that was a big one in my family. I actually have right here, my mother made a stocking for me, this beautiful cross-stitch stocking.
Oh, wow.
He's so talented. So amazing.
If you saw, what was it, Faustus, when we did Faustus, my mother did a lot of the embroidery that was on the frontispieces for the Deadly Sins. She is a ridiculously talented craftswoman. The other, it's not so much something that I celebrate, but it's kind of one of my favorite parts of that 12 days of Christmas is the Feast of the Innocents. Because that was a story that stuck with me when I was a kid. Obviously.
Not a celebration.
It is not the happy part.
Right.
So the Feast of the Innocents is the 29th of December. I'm pretty sure the 29th. When we commemorate the massacre of the children who had just been born by Herod, who was trying to find the Christ child and get rid of him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Feast of the Innocents is December 29th, and they're again in that Lucy Worsley documentary, they go into this a little bit, that Christmas carol Luli Lulai, which is definitely a period carol, and is about losing your child. And it is one of the things I really love, coming from, I went to Catholic school despite not being Catholic, and I became an Episcopalian because they had more smells and bells than the Lutherans did. And straight up, I mean, there's other reasons. There's definitely other reasons, but that's what drew me in. Like, that's how they hooked me. And the thing that I really love about holidays is the mysticism and the reminder throughout the Christmas season that this is the beginning of the story and it doesn't end well.
Yeah.
And so that memory of death and rebirth, and that memory of the melancholy along with the celebration, it's kind of the salt to the hot cocoa. It adds that extra bit of bite to the holiday.
That's cool.
Wow.
That's a lot more deep than what we I grew up in a military family, and we never had big family gatherings because we didn't live anywhere near the family ever, for most of my life. So for us, the only real traditional thing was we would put on either music or a movie, and we would decorate the tree together. And it wouldn't matter when. Sometimes we decorated the tree on Thanksgiving because that's when Dad was there. And sometimes we decorated the tree on New Year's because that's when Dad was there. My family was myself, my mother, my father, my sister. We didn't have anybody else. Yeah. But we did, nobody comes from nowhere. And while we're decorating the tree, we're looking at the ornaments. And I come from two sides of the family are hyper crafty. The women in my family on both sides just make things. So my aunt makes ceramics, beautiful ornaments that are hollow on the inside with little nativity scenes or reindeer or bells. And then the outside's all decorated. My grandmother also did the full-size Christmas tree things that stand on your table. My other grandmother did little teeny tiny canvas
Oh.
ornaments like this,
Mhm.
and these things that go in your stocking, and you put candy in them. They're like
That is
They're little-
adorable.
canvas cross stitch Pez dispensers, essentially, but
Nice.
we'd always put, like Hershey's Kisses or whatever in
Yeah.
there. And
It's
so
like
every
a
time we
lamb
would
chop.
decorate the tree, we would be, this is the thing that this person made, and this is a thing that this person made, and here's how you're connected to them, and here's where they live. And no, we can't call them right now because it's 3 o'clock in the morning where they live, but it was the way to connect to the family that honestly, sometimes I don't remember meeting.
Yeah.
I own things that were made for me by people who passed
Oh,
away before I
yeah.
was born.
Yeah.
My
Gotcha.
great grandmother made my piggy bank,
Aw.
that kind of thing. So that's my tradition as a family. That's the family tradition. My personal tradition is White Christmas.
Oh.
Christmas season cannot start unless I am watching Danny Kaye be a lunatic.
Right.
Wait, it's got to be. White Christmas was a real popular one for military families because, of course, at the start of the
military
movie,
anger.
our two heroes are both in the service, theoretically in the theater of war. And so they would play that movie at the USO.
Mhm.
And we would go, after we'd opened our gifts, we'd go to the USO to hang out with all the soldiers in the area who didn't have any family to go to anyway. And we'd be their family. So I have dozens of aunts and uncles that I'm not related to and who just basically would borrow me because I was a small, adorable child. And I would literally do tricks for candy canes. Dance on the table. Absolutely. Yes. You're going to give me sugar? I will. What do you want me to do? So for me, White Christmas it's a me tradition. It's not necessarily a family tradition, but it brings back a lot of good memories.
That so much reminds me. So, Kat and I both grew up in military families. I never lived overseas, but this reminds me in particular of one Christmas in Florida. We lived on a military base, and the ships were like right there. And we went Christmas caroling to all of the Navy ships that were in dock at that point.
Ooh.
And one of them was, I was talking to Ivar because I was like, I think it was the Farragut. I'm not sure. Which, yeah. And it was a Girl Scout thing that we went caroling on the ships, and that was where we actually got to go on board, and they fed us hot cocoa and brownies.
Aw.
And I have that was when I was 6, maybe 6 or 7. I have never forgotten that.
That's cool.
It's interesting that Kat, that you talked about White Christmas, because for me that is the sign of Christmas and everything. It was a tradition that my grandmother, bless her heart, she would sing along with the movie, and her voice wasn't what you call great, but it was
Yeah, but that's
beautiful.
part of the memory.
And now every day after Thanksgiving, but this year is different just because it's different. But usually on the day after Thanksgiving, I'm sorry, we will put that movie on, and we will decorate our Christmas tree and stuff like that, and get all festive.
Very cool.
Well, I have another movie recommendation. It is a British movie. You may not have seen it. You may have. If you haven't seen it, you're going to need a very dry sense of humor. But the other movie I watch to make sure it's the holidays is Hogfather.
Oh my God, yes, I've seen it.
Oh, yes.
What is it called again?
It's called The Hogfather.
I'm gonna have to look.
That
And
is
it
it's one of my favorite books, and they just went straight across for the
There's so many times when a book has a bad movie adaptation. But like Samantha was saying, exactly, they pulled that book straight into it.
Nice.
Nice.
And
I
yeah,
didn't-
some
never
of
read the
my
book.
very favorite, and it really goes into like the meaning of winter holidays,
Mm.
and you know, a lot of it, it is hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious and very weird. But it really is kind of a deconstruction of Christmas and winter holidays.
Very cool. All right.
Well, I think that is about it. Thank you, ladies,
Yeah.
for joining us. This was very educational, and I like to say that I'm a history nerd, but I joined the history game late in late in the term, so to speak.
It's
Um,
never too late.
And so it's really interesting to hear some of the things that you guys like. You just know. You just know.
You know,
Um,
straight up, it's because neither one of us has stopped learning throughout the course of adulthood. Like, we got out of high school, college, whatever, and we were not done.
no.
That's
And
me.
I think that one of the best parts about groups like this really is that as long as you get up in the morning and you're like, wait, I learned a thing. Cool. You're still in it for the right reasons. This is the reason why we do these things. It keeps your mind awake and fresh. And for me, it's a way to help, you know, it's been a rough year. It's
Mhm.
been a really rough year, and continually challenging myself to learn something new or to try something new, or yes,
Make
all right,
something.
I'll eat the Brussels sprout.
Oh, yeah.
I will do something that I haven't done before because I have the opportunity to do so.
That is absolutely my philosophy. Learn something new, make something, you know, do something with your hands and do something with your head and do something with your heart as often as you can.
And on that note, because that is a lovely note to end on, we appreciate our audience being with us today. We absolutely cannot do what we do here at the Baronsman without support of patrons like you. So if you like what you saw here, find out how to become part of our donor program at thebaronsman.org/donate. And we'll see you next time. And have a great, great weekend. Bye.
Bye.